So I'm Tony.
And I'm Steven.
And for the first time, we're coming to you not from the Blue Sky Lab, but from 79 degrees west. We are live streaming, and this podcast will be available on LinkedIn, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms.
You're going to have to automate. You're going to have to use this AI technology if you're going to be competitive and effective. You can automate anything. Anything that we can do, we should be able to automate. What are you doing 1,000 times you wish you didn't have to do?
The barriers of entry are getting lower across the board in both places, right? On the physical side, you have kind of the hardware and these robotic components that are cheaper in many ways than ever before. And then you have kind of big players at the AI side of things that are providing access to models that are, more powerful than ever before, but at a price point that was, never before seen. We know that about 78% of large US companies are now using AI regularly. But just by a show of hands, how many of you use, some form of AI or automation on a regular basis?
I think that's about 100%.
That's nearly every hand in the room, right?
So if we think about AI in the same way, I want someone who can use any tool that we can give them, but they can problem solve and they can make value on our product for our customers. This here has a camera on it. Okay. It also has these two codes. We can give this to a human and tell a human to do something 100 times. We analyze and use computer vision and algorithms, machine learning on this video. This thing now knows how to do it. We're just saying, there's the object, pick it up, right? And that's where AI makes things faster and the iteration time gets so much faster. Other questions on kind of manufacturing side of things? Yeah.
Can I just ask a deeper question on what you were just describing?
Sure.
So like the large language models had a lot of trouble explaining what they were doing.
Right.
And that seems to be improving. Can you ask the system to show you what it's thinking about as it tries to figure out how to pick up the object?
Yeah. So pattern recognition and part of AI has been around since the 1960s. And so we're leveraging those types of things. And in that, it detects patterns in imagery. Okay. And so yes, we can output what patterns it detected. Then we can also output the yaw, pitch, coordinates and also the XYZ of that. So it's not really easily understood by humans, but yes, we can basically output the numbers that say when we see this object at this angle, we know it should go to that angle, right? And so that's kind of how that's working. In most cases, we're not analyzing those deep numbers, but yes, we can output them and understand why it did that way. And if there was ever a problem, and let's just say the robot crashes, the first thing we do is like, how did it get there, and why did that safety bound not stop it? What are the numbers? We go and look at those numbers on those individual cases.
And that's one of the exciting things about reinforcement learning is while we might not be able to, get an output of it explaining itself exactly why it turned in this way, when we run the program in simulation over, hundreds of thousands of times, we can get a sense of, by watching it in aggregate, how it's thinking about or perceiving different things in its environment.
Yeah, that is a great part. In reinforcement learning, we can crash the robot 1,000 times, right, before we have ever put it in front of a person or put it in front of in a physical environment. So, yeah.
When you are doing, as you just suggested, with the video portion of it, roughly how many iterations of that are you doing to affect, and I'm assuming it's a derivative of a large language model that you're working with, but how many times are you doing this? 100 times? Is it 1,000,000 times?
No, it's more or less closer to 100. It depends on the level of precision you need. If you're picking up an object that's like, a kind of common ball, we can probably do that 20 to 30 times. If we're picking up one of those odd shaped parts for a Honda motor that's custom and only on a Honda motor and it has weird ways it could fall, then we might need to do that 100 or 200 times. But no, we're not talking millions.
And that's an example of where, oftentimes we can use physical problem solving and creative engineering to create some tolerance for error that allows us to, continue learning while we're still actively doing the process. Like if you look at these end effectors here, you'll notice that they're actually, intentionally designed to be far squishier in the center here and then firmer at the end. And so that gives us a lot more flexibility where, maybe it doesn't have to be precisely at this point to pick it up. You can, have a lot more flexibility with how you pick something up.
You can also pick up an egg.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Or flip a switch.
Yeah.
So, I think we've covered a lot of some of the common pitfalls, and we're into now a little bit more of kind of some of the best practices for folks using AI. And Stephen, this is a question that I think a lot of folks out there might be facing, which is this something that you should try to put in place and, put in action yourself, or is this something that you're, looking for kind of a teammate or a partner to come on board, or, how do you get started with this kind of thing?
Well, I think the first thing you do is you make sure you understand how to do it yourself, right? Like, don't automate something that hasn't been solved yet. You need to solve it, figure it out, because humans are really good at making a lot of little bitty decisions over and over again until they get it right. And then all of a sudden, now, once you've figured that out, now you can automate it. Now, you also want to take an outside looking approach. Is just because a human did it that way, because they have 5 fingers and 2 arms, that may not be the same way that a robot needs to do it. But we at least know what that process is to build off of it. But once you have that, then I think the question is do you have the staff that you need to do it? Do you have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, computer software, developers, and then computer vision engineers? Is that what you're going to need? Or can you, buy one of these robots and take the basic software and program it yourself and get what you need? If it's a simple move it here and there, then maybe you can do that. If you're going to tie into your warehouse management system, your factory management system, you want to get the most value out of it, you're probably going to need to leverage someone who has kind of a bigger team that has experience doing that. And then they come in, they help solve it. Then they train you on how to manage it and maintain it. But they're also a partner that works with you. And I'll just go ahead and say one of the things I always recommend to any of the companies that we're working with is that, for us, you pay for uptime. Okay. If you're down, we have a vested interest to make sure we get you back up and running, right? So when you're working with these vendors, make sure that there's a financial incentive to keep you up and running, not just, oh, I hope it works. Good luck figuring it out, right? You've got to make sure that that's a true partner who has the same motivations that you do.
And that your interests are aligned, as you said. And so that's, a great kind of rule of thumb on the physical automation side of things. What about, things that are, maybe a little bit less physical in the knowledge side of things, where chatbots.
Was talking to a company recently, and they were their financial system had been homegrown and built by someone. That person left the company, and now they're in a really bad spot. And that person said, "Well, I have a new company over here, and now basically they're paying really big bills to them." Nobody wants that to happen, right? No one wants to be held hostage like that. And I think it's the same thing we got to think about AI, is that we've got to make sure we understand and manage these ourselves, and that we know enough to ask the right questions to make sure that we have control over those things, that we're doing it on the right servers, and we have management of that. And so I think it's really important that when you're designing out your structure, you're also looking at how are we going to be able to take this on or deal with it in the future, and not just, well, this vendor solved our problem today, who's going to solve it tomorrow?
Okay, so I'm going to go and get my PhD in data science, and then I'm going to boot up ChatGPT. Is that the right sequence of events?
So, no, I think that is not the right sequence. I think we want to solve real problems. I think sometimes a data scientist can really help you to get the right data and to analyze that data and get great insights from it. And then sometimes it's like, well, I really just need the person who's on the line, who knows what's going on, who's dealing with the customer every day. If I put those same tools in front of them, they're able to make the right decision.
Yeah. And, it's the quote that comes to mind for me is that time in the market beats timing the market. So the earlier and the more often you're able to get experience with some of these tools, the better off you're going to be in the long run. Even if you don't start at an expert level of proficiency on day one, getting out there and getting an understanding of at a baseline how, what the phraseology is, what's happening under the hood is, the most valuable way to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I love about some of these more cost-effective arms is that you want to move into automation. You can put these on a desk, literally clamp them down like you see over there, and get started the same day. Like, our software is no code option, right? You drag and drop and do things. And so that lets you have more time to figure it out. And you may decide, oh, this is too much for me. Or you may say, oh, this is exactly what I need, and we can have an intern who can do this, right? And so it just kind of depends on what you're doing. But you get it out, you start working with it, and you do a simple concept. You say, this one part of our job, we're going to try to automate. And then that was successful. Now you're going to add that next piece, and you're going to make the next piece, and now you're automating your whole line.
So, Stephen, one of the questions that I hear all the time, and especially on the university side, is, for folks that are interested in upskilling, and maybe they're not going to, become robotics experts overnight. But if they, do want to get a little bit more insight into what AI is and how it can be useful for them, where do they get started? Now, I know your first answer is going to be Beyond the Bot, but outside of Beyond the Bot.
Well, I think coming to events like this and hearing how other people are using it is helpful, and things like Beyond the Bot. I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. Right. And what are they spending their time doing? So one of the things that we have a principle in our house is that you use technology to help you learn and grow. We don't use technology to help us escape or do something we're not supposed to. Okay. If we keep that principle in mind as adults, it's pretty valuable too. Right. And so how can I use AI to learn and grow and get better? Right? How can I use it to better my business? And so, as I'm looking at the things, it's like, okay, what do I want to do? Well, literally, I was writing the syllabus for our new AI tools. So what do? I go to ChatGPT and I'm like, what are the most important tools that a media professional needs to know today? And I'm using those things to help learn and figure out. And it listed a whole bunch of tools I'd never heard of. So now I'm going and buying subscriptions and trying to figure out how do I make those things work. And now I'm building ads that are, AI driven ads because, well, that's a new tool that I want my students to learn. I need to figure it out. And so now I'm like, hey, Tony, check out these ads that we're making, And so, I think it's a matter of being curious and using the technology to make yourself better is kind of the best start.
And I will add to that, just on a personal note, that some of the most helpful, practical, tactical information about how to work with some of these, especially, kind of the more mainstream commercial tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, and the like. The best training that I ever got for working with those systems was not in a textbook, but was on LinkedIn, was at tech meetups, was at Innovate Carolina, events like this where, you're able to talk to folks and, kind of share best practices with folks that are at a similar level of experience.
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is one that I see a lot of kind of new insights around the people who are in the business that I'm in. And so it's like, oh, well, if they're using it, maybe I need to go check that out as well.
At an event this week, we saw actually an automation tool that kind of helps you keep track of all the different AI workflows that you might have going. And, it was quite handy. But in that same spirit, I'm curious if anybody'd like to share what their favorite AI tool that they use on a regular basis is.
We use heavily Copilot.
Mm-hmm.
So the efficiency that you mentioned, for writing a code, our cutoff is 95% coverage with the storage. Either we do it 2 days, now it is like 2 hours, literally 2 hours. The Copilot. And that's one thing I would say.
Well, let's talk about Copilot for a second. So now with the technology, you're able to generate code very quickly. And I'll go ahead and say we were looking at a potential hire, and we looked at his GitHub account and looked at this code. And one of my developers said, he's either really, really good or everything on his GitHub account is written by ChatGPT. And I don't know, or Copilot. But I don't know which one it is, okay? And that's where the human part comes in, because now we're going to ask the questions and we're going to understand. At the same time, there was another person we were looking at, and we knew absolutely that his code was written by generative AI, okay? How did we know that? Because he implemented it improperly. That it wasn't the best use of it. It wasn't the way it should have been done. And we could tell that by looking at it. So we have two people, both using a tool, but one uses it very differently than the other. Or maybe he's not using it, so we don't know. But we're going to dig in and find that out. And so I think Copilot is a really interesting thing, is that for my students, it's a great thing. But if they don't understand the architecture and the processes and how computers work, they're never going to be able to implement that code in the most efficient way.
And it doesn't replace the problem-solving side of the equation where you actually figure out how do you approach this from a software perspective, right? But yeah, Copilot's absolutely a great example. Are there any others that folks would like to share?
Yeah, I've started using NAN for process automation and hooking in what I call the hooks, bringing things in from ChatGPT to Perplexity, and in my case, what I call fuzzy logic and first principle thinking into good, better output to what ChatGPT is putting out. A standalone ChatGPT or standalone technology. NAN has been a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I wanted to follow up with the question is, one of the emerging trends right now is called vibe coding, and what the kids are calling vibe coding. What's the impact? What's the future of that look like for non-developers, in an instance you guys use where this is too scary, it's too perfect, right? When you get the vibe coding thing in the mix, what's the output you see in the next 6 months that could impact potential hires for people that are looking to hire developers that may have been just vibe coded, where somebody could more than just a chat prompt. You code.
Yeah. First of all, is understanding when it is that way or not. So if you don't know, like vibe coding is basically using the tools and you're just kind of like flowing out. You don't actually know what you're doing, but you're kind of like coding and developing. Am I saying this, explaining this right? So you end up with like someone who can output a mobile app very quickly and looks like they know what they're doing. And it might actually solve a problem. It might be marketable. It actually might do what that person set out to do. And we can't discount that. Would I have architected it that way? Maybe not. Can they scale at the same rate that I want to? But you know what? They probably might be happy with 100,000 users and that's all they needed. And they were able to do that very quickly, right? And so, I think this is one of those things that like, I don't want to discount the way someone's doing it if it solved the problem for them, okay? Now, would I invest in that? Maybe not, right? Would I hire that person? Maybe, maybe not. Like, it just kind of depends. And I think we've got to figure out what fits your business and how you're wanting to use it. So, yeah.
And
Sorry.
one other thing on vibe coding, sorry, before we move off, and Stephen, this is a story I don't know if I've actually told you yet, but as an early stage prototyping tool, it is absolutely just incredible. We had a circumstance when we were, talking through the user interface for one of the apps that we were working on, or soon to be working on. We had actually not started development of it yet. Myself and Ontek, one of our senior developers, were talking about, what should this look like? What should this tool do? What should it be, basically? And about 10 minutes after our conversation, he slacked me 3 different links to the 3 different prototypes that we had talked about. So just to understand the total workflow there, we have all of our meetings are recorded and transcribed. He had copied and pasted the transcription of our meeting describing what kind of the 3 possibilities for what this UI could look like into a tool that creates a working UI that modeled fairly close to what we were kind of envisioning as the 3 options, right? Now, would I put any of those 3 into production? Absolutely not. But as to nearly instantaneously be able to look at the 3 of them side by side and say, oh, hey, we didn't think about, this impact or, this edge case interaction is just absolutely incredible. And
That's a great example.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, what was your question?
I was just going to say pretty much what you said. It's I've been accused before of doing something impossible, and the reason I was able to do it was because I had the engineer, the programmer, the creative person, everybody all in one head, right? So just sit down and just get it done. Now, if you have to take that thing that you made that you couldn't possibly have made in 10 minutes, if you have to take that then to your IT department member, you've already saved months, right, at that moment. So, this is what I want. It's the right color. It has the right things. This is how it works. Inside the code, here's the formulas or whatever that you have to have. That's already like way beyond what you would get out of writing a freaking spec for 3 months, right?
And then we can take that and we can test it, right? We can A/B test it. We put that in front of users and find out what works and what doesn't, right? And that's a great use case. So,
yeah. Are there any other questions at this moment?
yeah, Ed.
I'd love to hear 1 or 2 examples of the coolest implementation you guys have been involved with. You can define cool, whether it's ROI, faster, safer, whatever.
All right, so I'm going to tell you one that we didn't get because it's just a cool one. Space Force had a project where they wanted to see if our vision could detect space junk, then catch it, and then jettison it into the atmosphere. I thought that was a really cool use case, and I was like, that's some math that I really don't think we can take on and survive long enough for our company to survive. But I was like, that's a really cool one, But let me see if I can think of one that we've done. Let's see. On a savings case, like ROI, we had a customer that called us 3 months after deployment, or emailed 3 months after deployment and said, hey, just thought you might want to know, we use 70% less paint than we ever expected than we do when we have a human on this. And he got his ROI in 3 months. And that was and that was unexpected ROI. He was expecting it with humans not doing the work. All of a sudden, his expensive paint, he was saving on that. And then also, you're not having to deal with waste. And so when you have hazardous materials and not having to deal with the waste of that. And so those are a lot of things that automation has helped. Do you have one, like your favorite?
You stole mine. Mine was going to be the auto painter, but I will share another one that I'm quite fond of that might happen at some point in the future, which is the use of robotics as an experiential kind of event-based type of thing where you can build large-scale implementations of your favorite small arcade games. I think those are very, very cool.
Yeah. We had a client who came to us and wanted to make the crane, the large, arcade crane at 20 foot by 20 foot by 20 foot. I totally wanted to do that just for fun. Ultimately, they thought it was too expensive and they walked away. But one day we're going to make, and just for the record, that would break the world's record of the largest arcade crane game.
Will it make the call that actually works?
Yeah, so we actually, the spec was to have multiple modes. One is arcade mode, which could happen, it either picks it up or doesn't. The other spec was 100% pick rate. And so then we were going to use vision to actually pick it, so every kid would win. That was the goal. Like, we could do both.
Is that Mr. Beast?
Don't know, can't say. Other questions?
Okay, well, this may not be directly related, but reading about AI agents, and I guess the next evolution of that is so they're doing things now. So not only do I want you to give me my itinerary for my vacation, but I want you to book the hotels all along the way, etc. How does that correlate with what you're doing, or is that just in a separate vein from what you're doing with the robotics?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we think about the physical agent, right? I mean, there's a lot of discussion around humanoid robots, and one of the reasons that people want humanoid robots, I think I'm gonna stop. We're gonna talk a minute for humanoid robots. Let's take that for a minute. The reason we have humanoid robots have grown so quickly is because if you remember the nuclear explosion in Japan, the robots could not get up the stairs and they couldn't open doors. So the push for humanoid robots was to be able to work in a human environment that was unsafe. Okay? That is a great, valuable use case, right? The majority of humanoid robot use cases we're seeing today could be done by a task-oriented robot much easier, okay? But we're not there. We haven't got to that realized place. And I think there's a place for the humanoid robot that's gonna come. To your question around this idea of an agent, can a physical agent act on my behalf? We talk about augmenting, like using AI for augmentation. So you give me insights and then I make a decision on what to do. There's also a big difference between actually pushing the button, right? And so when we think about defense, are we going to have it, shoot based on the AI's understanding of that? That's a big question. That has to be ethical question. That has to be discussed. When we think about autonomous vehicles, these are probably the most advanced robotics we have today are autonomous vehicles. An autonomous vehicle has to act on its own based on the recommendation because it's so much faster than the human, right? Should I stop when that person pulls out in front of me? I don't want to just warn them. I'm going to go ahead and stop, right? And so that's a great example of an agent acting on my behalf. But do I want it actually like shooting the rocket off? That's a totally different discussion, right? And so I think we have to find those right use cases. Booking me a reservation for dinner, the consequences, if it screwed up, it's not that big a deal, right? But in the physical world, we have to be much more careful around how we leverage those agents, and it needs a lot of testing in a closed environment.
But I will add to that, that's an important question is, where the human touch still adds the most value and, where agents can really come in and take over. Your example of kind of booking a dinner reservation, I can tell you that, I did make the mistake one time of setting up an automation on my phone that texted my fiance while she was in Italy every morning, "Good morning, I love you." Now, the impact of that initial automation was very, very strong, right? And when she found out it was an automation, obviously that was a less than less than ideal outcome
You
for
should have
myself.
used the random number generator.
That would have been the ticket, right? But so just because it can be automated doesn't necessarily mean that it should be, right? And so as agents get more and more powerful, I think that's the question that we're going
With
to
a lot of our
ourselves.
clients, especially in the kind of restaurant hospitality industry, we try to say, what are the things that we can automate in the back of the house that allows you to engage with your guests in the front of the house more? Right, that's where we want to be, because we don't want to automate that system. We want you to still have an engaging memory and engage with people. And so I'm not a big fan of putting, like in the hospitality space, of putting the robots out there facing the public, but you use that in a way that's going to help you get more attention to do a better job at servicing them, but still having a human interaction.
Have you found people resistant to artificial intelligence in your space? Worried about transparency or application of it mixed into the robotics?
Yeah, no, I think it's important that when we work with companies. So one of the things was we went to a company on Friday. We did not wear branded material, right? Because there's a fear that comes with, you're going to replace my job, you're going to take those things, and so I think that's a thing we have to think about. Also, when we work with a company to deploy the robots, we talk to them about kind of how they want to talk to your staff about this, because one of our clients, who they hadn't even signed a contract, but they put out in their newsletter that they were going to switch to robots, and everyone freaked out, right? And so that was not the best way to deliver that to people who were already skeptical. It was great from the company's perspective. The boss was very excited, but it wasn't the best way to deliver that news to his team. So we try to work with people and make sure we understand where each stakeholder is, and a stakeholder can be that line worker who is going to be working side by side with that robot. They need the proper training. They need to understand it. I mean, for example, we name them. We give them like human names. We sometimes put googly eyes on them to kind of give that kind of like a more fun understanding of what they're seeing.
And it has a measurable improvement in actual productivity, because it literally reframes it from something that is a tool coming in to replace you to a coworker that is coming in to help you. And that makes a huge difference in how they interact with it, whether they help it when something is just out of its reach, and little micro decisions like that. But to your question about transparency, this is something that we talk about all the time, which is that a lot of folks think that by automating a process, they're somehow losing some amount of control or visibility or insight into what's actually happening in the moment. And in reality, I think my opinion, at least, is that that couldn't be further from the truth. This is almost kind of a dream scenario where you have someone who is constantly writing down everything that they are seeing, thinking, and hearing, right? And so by having that auditable data trail that goes back, to the start of the process, you have a level of insight into what's happening that you almost never did before. And in terms of control, you really do have this kind of blank slate scenario where you can write the program to do exactly what you want it to do. And then you have a high level of confidence that that's exactly what's going to happen every single time. And so, that consistency piece, and, you're front loading your control, right? You're obviously hands off as the process is running, but in the problem solving and the program writing and, process development phase, I would argue that you have a greater level of insight and a greater level of control than, relying on human variability to make the right choice.
So Tony, I know you probably had a way you wanted to close this out. So if we were to go to your last question or section, what would be the way you'd want to kind of end our time here today?
Well, Stephen, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do. So, I think a lot of this underscores the idea that there's a lot happening in this space, right? There's a lot to pay attention to. But what does it actually mean to be future-proof at a time when the future is changing by the day?
I hate that term, because I don't think there's any way to be future-proof. What I think you can do is prepare for an unknown future, right? So, mentioned my kids before. What is the job that they're going to get when they come out of high school, college? What is that going to look like? I can't tell you. I really cannot tell you. I wish I could. I wish I could predict those trends and see where that was going, but I can't. What are we doing? We're making sure that they are good problem solvers. We're making sure that they can engage with people, that they can tell stories, that they can write, that they can engage in a way that is different than other people, right? As I want to future-proof my company, I want to make sure that our company is flexible, that we can move quickly, that as we see a trend coming, we can make adjustments very quickly. And that idea of smart automation helps us to do that. right? So leveraging AI to help us to be more nimble, I think is a really important thing of being future proof if you're trying to do that. So I don't say future proof, I say that we're trying to be able to adapt to an unknown future. But if I'm going to do that, I've got to plan for it. I've got to train my staff. I've got to engage them, and I got to build systems that allow them to be flexible and nimble.
And the only thing that I would add to that is that, on a personal level, I think it is in a lot of ways about, maintaining that sense of curiosity and going out and, attending events like this and investigating and learning and, really embracing, a growth mindset and a learning posture. And, looking at all of this as an opportunity and an augmentation tool and, not a threat. And, keeping up with things in the space by following things like Beyond the Bot, which you should all like and subscribe on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube.
Nice plug.
Thank you. But sincerely, we are very grateful for all of you for joining us, and we'll be hanging around a little bit after if anybody has any other burning questions that we didn't get to. And I think you all have our contact information. You can find us on LinkedIn, and we're happy to help out in any way we can.
Thank you very much.